Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. As always, I'm your host, Stuart Cranes, and we got another really awesome guest for you guys this week. And before I introduce her, as always, this show is free. Please like, subscribe, share this out with somebody if you get any value from today's conversation, which I know you will. And please be sure, especially if you're listening to this on Spotify, please give this a 5-star review. It just helps the guests and this show be a little bit more relevant in the search function for people looking to level up their lives and create the lives of their dreams as well. And so, without further ado, I want to jump right in and introduce today's guest. She is somebody with a decade plus of experience coaching leaders and executives on their ways of being, helping them reach their goals, just up leveling who they be in the world. She recently came out with the book Full of Herself, Finding the Audacity to Love Who You Are. Without further ado, I want to welcome Sarah Moore on the show. Thank you so much for being here, Sarah.
Thank you, Stuart. I tell you what, we did a cracking job as a team stumbling on that subtitle because it still moves me every time.
Yeah. Tell me a
Yeah.
bit more about that. How did you land on that as the subtitle?
You know, I guess I phrased it that way, and the truth is, I think it found us. There wasn't any radical masterminding. There wasn't trying to piece something together. There wasn't, ooh, we love the word audacity. It just fell into place, and it really felt first and foremost like a mission statement for the work that I do in the world. And, I might be coaching these women, and let me tell you, I'm doing the work right alongside them. And so I think that it's so audacious to want to develop an intimate relationship with ourselves. And so
Mhm.
once there was something about that phrase that just flew out and felt, oh yes, we like it, we've got something. It then at some point became a natural subtitle, because that's what the book is all about. It's about intimate struggles of, how do I feel full of myself? How do I fall way short? What's the journey through that struggle? And then what's a specific tool or insight that can help me, you, whoever's reading it, maybe make a different choice or just feel a little bit more at peace with whatever that tension is in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just the phrase full of herself, like on the surface, it has a negative connotation, but I understand that in this book, you're explaining that as something that women want to claim for themselves and who they be and how they show up in the world. And I was wondering if you could speak into that a bit more for the audience.
As women, we especially are tiptoeing between wanting to speak up, take up space. We feel like we have the confidence to do so. Sometimes we don't. And the messaging of don't be too much, say it a certain kind of way, be loud, but don't be too loud. And so it's just a constant struggle of how do we assert ourselves. And yeah, you're right, full of herself definitely has a negative connotation. Arrogance, being conceited. I think a lot of women, since I've chosen this title, have even said to me, I have heard the words literally, don't be too full of yourself. And I just think, heck no, no to that. Right, we define full of herself by that mission statement. It's somebody who finds the audacity to love who they are. And I strongly believe that a woman who is full of herself, meaning she has the courage to grow, she says, I'm sorry, she feels good as often as possible, she's sobbing on the bathroom floor and picking herself up again when she can. She's living into this full range of who she is. That's the most beautiful thing you'll ever see. And when I was gifted this phrase, which was a phone call with a writing coach that I thought maybe I needed or wanted to hire in order to be able to write a book. Thankfully, a friend intervened and said, why don't you just start writing? You've been writing a blog for 10 years, you know how to write, just get after it. And I was like, okay. However, that phone call was magical because when I was describing what I thought the book could be, but I still wasn't really sure, she said, I recommend that you call it Full of Herself. And I was like, yes, I loved it instantly. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Thank you for sharing a bit more. And, you know, I'm a coach as well, but you definitely have a bit more experience than I do. But I have found that any coach that is worth their salt, you mentioned this at the beginning of the conversation, is doing the work as they're leading people through the work themselves. And in a way, I feel like this book is a culmination of your background, your stories, the work you've done, and in supporting women moving forward. And I'm just curious what led you to that moment where you wanted to be a coach, support women and leaders in this way?
Oh, that's such a good question. I I've been part of this mentoring program for the university that I attended in England at the University of Sheffield. And it's been such a fabulous experience for me because I've got to be with these 19, 20, 21 year olds. And I've also been doing some work with some sororities locally here in Ohio and just getting to relive. I don't know if it's more so today, 20 years on, I'm 40 or not, but just to be with these young women and see the angst of
Mm.
who am I? How can I please my parents? What comes next? Because I have no idea. And that's exactly how I felt. So, in these mentee mentor sessions, I've been able to explain and share my journey, and they want to know that. And what I've come to is nothing about my journey was linear. I think it's true for so many of us. And what I'm most proud of about my journey is that a good number of my decisions, especially career wise, have been born out of passion and purpose. So, just to give you a little snapshot, I remember when I was 14 at a school career night saying, oh, I'd love to get paid to have intimate conversations. I had no idea what that meant, but I did know I didn't want to be a counselor or a therapist or a psychologist. I'd never even heard of a life coach, right? I also had a talent for writing, so I thought maybe I could be a travel writer. I grew up traveling the world. I had like a little bit of success with travel writing. And so fast forward many years, I was in the States, I was doing a master's degree, and I was still on that travel writing path. And the first year of that master's program, they paid my tuition in exchange for being a research assistant. It was the worst assistant position ever. I was cataloging these old Hispanic artifacts. Ugh, it was terrible. And so somehow I managed to blag my way in to the local newspaper and get hired as an editor, right? I'd never had a writing job, but I'd had a couple of travel articles published. I'd written a story in high school that my teachers really liked. Like I just pieced this portfolio together and I got in the door. And so I gave up that scholarship money and now I was under my own dime. And I'll tell you, the pride I feel about the work that I do is just the same today as it was when I was an editor at that newspaper for a year. I ended up, there's so many stories I could tell about that. The one I'll tell right now is I ended up interviewing local business owners and telling their stories and turning them into advertorials, right? So sort of a story that has like an advert type spin to get people to want to come and buy from them. And how could I have possibly known that experience was paving the way for me to become an entrepreneur years later. Then after I did all of that, I was having trouble. I was in a small town in Texas trying to land a job in travel writing, which really was New York or San Francisco. And also my actions and my ideas weren't really aligning. So I'd finished working at the paper. I was traveling quite a bit, but I wasn't writing anything. So finally, I let go of that dream. It took me a little while to come to terms with, should I, could I, did I let something go? And I had the idea to open my own bra business. I have a tiny rib cage and a fuller bust. And I was shocked that in America, the land where you can buy anything and everything, I couldn't find a bra that fit. So, very long story short, I was putting together a business plan, trying to open my own business. A company opened in Houston, Texas, which was about an hour from where we were living at the time. I say we, my then boyfriend and I, who's now my husband. And I ended up joining that company, right? I thought, Preston, it was my husband actually, who said, join them, learn everything you can about the business. And if you still love it, then we can revisit this idea of you opening your own boutique. And quickly realized, do not want to own a brick and mortar. That's for the birds. It's open all of the time. And they'd also created the concept I had in mind. But Stuart, I was in the business of changing women's lives.
Ooh.
We were an all-female company. Our founder had just been featured on Oprah, and Oprah called her the bra whisperer. And we had all of this market share that was available to us. So I grew in that company so fast. I ended up coaching, opening new stores, doing all sorts of things that were really interesting. And shortly after I joined and I realized I don't want to own my own company doing this, I'm in the business of changing women's lives, which didn't mean that much to me, but I was aware of it. I came across an article about a life coach, right? No, I had no business stumbling across that article, except I'm sure I was supposed to read it. And the moment I read it, I went, holy shit, this is the thing I've always wanted to do. I didn't know it existed, and I definitely didn't know I could make a living doing it. And so it planted the seed. And then a few years later, I finally found the courage to say, okay, this lingerie business is, enough is enough. This isn't really where I want to be. And it's time to start dedicating myself to coaching. And so of course, there are other pieces of that story, but doesn't it paint such a beautiful picture that when I today or any of us are struggling with, oh my gosh, what's next? Or I don't know where this is heading, or just the uncertainty of life, I can look back on that and think everything is paving the way if I will just surrender, trust the process, and see if I can have as good of a time as I can while that happens. Well, let me tell you, that'd be a life well lived to me. Because naturally, I'm uptight. I want to know. I want to force solutions. And so coaching found me, and it's just, I'm sure it's the thing I'm supposed to be doing. Even on the days that I want to scream and yell because it's hard and I don't know what's coming next.
Awesome. And thank you so much for sharing your story and how you got to this moment. And, something that came up a lot in your story, at least in how I was hearing it, is all the times you reinvented yourself. You tried something, you went all in, that wasn't the thing. You tried another thing, that wasn't it, you pivoted. And so I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this are probably going to be somewhere similar in their journey as they're looking to up level themselves, figure out maybe what the thing is, or even how they can do the thing for them better than they are currently. And knowing that you have pivoted so many times, to be a successful coach as you are now, a published author as you are now, what advice would you give to people that are maybe still in that process of figuring out and becoming so that they can find that thing?
Firstly, that journey never ends.
Mm,
Just because I'm sure I'm doing the work I'm supposed to be doing doesn't mean every single day I'm still trying to understand who I am in my life and how to relate to that. So that never stops is the first thing. The second thing is there isn't the thing. We're
mm,
putting so much pressure on ourselves to find the thing. And I'm really sure that the next thing that feels right and makes sense to me is a better framework.
mm,
There's too much talk about, what am I supposed to be doing? What's my purpose? What's my passion? And it's just robbing us of the fluidity that we're supposed to be living into and out of every day. That'd be the second thing I would say. Just what makes sense now. And I think something that I have become skilled at, and I do believe it is a skill, is giving myself permission to go all in. Right? I used to confuse going all in with thinking I then had to take all this action. Like, oh, maybe I'm in the wrong place and now just because I've had this idea, I got to go after it and make it. Well, today I can now discern, oh, for example, I'll tell you, this is relevant to the story I just shared. I am so sure that Columbus, Ohio, where you and I live, could welcome a lingerie store because we don't have a good one. We don't have one. We
mhm.
definitely don't have a good one. And we would knock it out of the park. And that is something that, boy, is it just sitting in the back of my mind. I said, like lingerie, I'm done with that, right? I don't want to own a brick and mortar store, but
Yeah.
does it just keep catching my attention? And so I entertain it, right? When it
Mhm.
comes up, I talk about it. I ask myself, is there a next step to take? No, I'm still just enjoying the idea of trying it on. I talk about having an event space next to it where I could host my retreats, right? And events for women that I do. I've already come up with a tagline, lifting women up in more ways than one,
Wow, there you go.
right? Right? But here's the point is I'm letting myself savor that. And then I'm coming back to that question, is there a next step? No, just enjoying it, and then I'm able to let it go. And I don't think enough of us give ourselves permission to daydream, to marinate in
Mhm.
the ideas that we have. And then if there is a next step to take, great. But let's not go from A to F. Let's just go A to B, B to C, right? So maybe I decide I want to start doing some research. Like
Mhm.
what are really our lingerie options within 100 miles? And then I do that and I've got no interest whatsoever and it just sits there for another 6 months. Maybe there's like, oh, I did this research. You know what? I'm going to go and talk to one of these owners and just learn a little, right? And so I think that's a really beautiful process that we can entertain more. And then there's also another framework. I talk about it in the book, and it's this where there's three kind of things that we're always doing in some stage. We're either making a decision, we're experiencing an outcome, or we're pivoting,
Tell us more.
right? So let's say let's use an example. I think that's always the most helpful. Let's say I have an opportunity to get promoted and I don't really know whether to say yes or no to it. Okay. I have a decision of some kind to make. Maybe it's yes or no. Maybe it's something that's a preamble to that. Maybe it's reaching out to some people who are in the position or have had the position and learning more about it. Maybe it's talking to my family and talking about, what would be the benefits of this, what would be the downsides of it, and sort of seeing how it impacts our dynamic. Maybe it's looking at finances and saying, where are we? What do we need? What do we not need? If this comes with more money, what would we use it for? How would that impact our well-being, right? So we're making some kind of decision, right? There's some decision to be made in front of us. Sometimes it can be no decision whatsoever. And that's a decision all by itself. And we're just sitting quietly. So we're making a decision. We're then experiencing the outcome of that. Let's say we've had a discussion about finances and I realize, I'm going to have to work 10 extra hours a week. And that's going to be more hurtful than the extra 25,000 I'm going to make for whatever reasons we've decided as a family. So I'm sort of experiencing the outcome of that decision. I'm letting it sit. I'm sort of getting into alignment with it. Maybe I'm checking that fact with somebody else in my life and just seeing, does that make sense or doesn't it? Does it sound true or doesn't it? Okay, so I'm experiencing that outcome. And then as a result, I'm going to pivot. Right? So I'm either actually then almost a form of making the decision or not. I'm going to say yes or no. Right? I'm sort of pivoting into that or pivoting away from it. And now I'm back to, okay, cool. Right? I'm clear about what I want. And then the cycle just begins all over again. And we are in and out of these 3 stages all of the time about all sorts of different things. Sleeping, eating, conversations we need to have, work, you name it, everything. And I think that can really simplify the process for people. Where am I in that stage? Am I feeling fear because I haven't made a decision and I really do need to make the time to make one? Am I sitting too long in the outcome and not being willing to pivot? And that's what's really causing me angst, more so than the circumstances themselves, right? So this is kind of the scenario. And so I think what makes for a good life, what makes for being able to pivot, which is a function of courage, is being able to move through these at a steady pace, not getting stuck anywhere for too long, because that's what causes the most pain.
Wow. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing that. I hope the folks listening are taking notes, or if they're listening to this in their car, that they'll go back and re-listen to that segment, because that was super powerful about getting unstuck in kind of the rigmarole of decision making that so many of us do, that leads to inaction and inactivity on anything that we're up to. Something that you said right there at the end about courage. I'm sure it takes a lot of courage to be a woman who is full of herself, but also to pursue any type of dream. In your opinion, how does someone manufacture or create courage? Is it something they can summon? Or if you could just speak into that a bit more.
I'd love to. And I'd also love to add something that I just thought about that we were talking about previously.
Please.
This is why we need coaches, counselors, mentors, support groups to help us navigate those moments. Because I don't know about you, but left to my own devices, I will get stuck. I won't move as quickly as I can through those 3 stages. I might have the awareness, I might be able to take action sometime, but I certainly can't do it consistently and do it well for myself without that outside support. I want to put a plug for having somebody in our life that isn't our mom or our sister or our best friend or our brother or whatever, who can really feed into us, because we need that. And then to answer your question about courage, I love talking about courage because it's a learnable, teachable skill. It's not something we're born with or not. It is a learnable, teachable skill. And the building block upon which the skill of courage comes from or is derived is vulnerability. There is no courage without vulnerability. What is vulnerability? Vulnerability is risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. Risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. And by God, would I like to live a life where I don't have to come up against those? And we come up against them all the time, every day. It's just always there because that's what life is. It's inherently uncertain, a little risky, and as a result, we feel emotionally, right, in response. Not always logically so, because some of that survival instinct kicks in and we think, oh my God, I just feel like I'm going to die if I do this.
Sure.
Not so much, right? But that's what it feels like in our system. And so we have to, as a starting point, when it comes to developing a practice around vulnerability, which then springboards us in the direction of courage, is start to name our feelings.
Okay.
I talked at the beginning of our conversation here about living into this full range. Well, we have a whole emotional range available to us, everything from empowerment, love, freedom, joy, and appreciation at the top of that scale, down to despair, powerlessness, grief, rage at the bottom. And when we are squeezed, when we are under pressure, we tend to only have access to 3 emotions: sad, glad, and mad.
Of course, they rhyme conveniently.
I know. Sometimes I go sad, glad. Wait, what was the other one? Sad, glad, and mad. And that cuts us off to a whole host of possibilities in our life. So when we can start getting good at saying, I'm feeling not just tired or anxious, which is so overly used, but I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling irritated, I'm feeling fearful, I'm feeling disappointed, I'm feeling joy. By the way, I always say a typical emotional scale runs from about 1 at the high to 21 at the low. So we've got all of these feelings in between. And I say you're not aiming to be at number 1. You're aiming to be at about number 7, which is typically peace and contentment.
Love
and
that.
I define, peace and contentment is nothing needs to change in order for me to feel okay. Just, things might be crap. I might sure wish some things could be different, but you know what? They're okay. I'm going to control what I can and let go of the rest. And as a result, summon up some contentment about where I am. And so as we start to name these feelings, what we do is we take the sting out of the circumstance that's causing that feeling. Then we start to just regain a little bit of power, which is us being vulnerable. Right? Instead of going, oh God, I hate her when she does that. I feel sad when she says that. 2 very different responses. So we're not armoring up and kind of pushing through and pushing other people away. We're leaning into ourselves. Even just saying, this is coming to me right now, even just saying, it makes me sad when she says that. That is courage. Right? That is courage, which then begets a next courageous action too. I mean, I don't want to simplify courage because there are many, many steps to it. And I think this is such an important building block. I mean, I've been coaching women all over the world for over a decade, and it's still a struggle for women to tell me how they're feeling. Even when I have been asking them for months, years on, okay, how did that make you feel? Just as a check-in practice. So I think that's a great place to start. And you can just go online download an emotional scale and just print it off. Just have one, because I have it in the front of my journal. We if you're on video, you can kind of see it here, but we print out these scales. I share them with clients. We put them in the front of the book, and every single day, well, I mean, I don't journal every day, but most days I do, I still reference this scale, even after years of practice, because I just sometimes forget how I feel. And this really helps me. And that's a step in the right direction of being a woman I feel proud of, which is a woman who lives with vulnerability and, as a result, courage in my days.
Wow, thank you so much. And I have heard many a time in podcasts, read in books, and also in the coaching that I do, just the concept that through vulnerability we find our power. And I want to take my hat off to you, because I have not heard it quite explained the way that you just explained it for myself and the audience here. So I want to thank you for that. The follow-up question that I want to ask, because I'm sure people listening to this are thinking it, you mentioned that vulnerability requires risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. And I'm sure that a lot of people get hung up on the risk part, because it's the concept of, I'm going to be vulnerable, but what if it's not received? Like, what if I am not received the way I want to be received? What if I'm actually received negatively with the person or people that I'm trying to be vulnerable with? And I'm curious if you can provide any coaching for people for whom may be feeling that listening to this conversation.
I think we're talking about discernment. So being vulnerable doesn't mean we share everything with everyone, that we let it all hang out, right? Being vulnerable is a practice, it's a skill. So we learn over time how to share in appropriate ways, and most importantly, with the people who have earned the right to hear our story.
Got it.
So that's a form of boundary setting that is somewhat try, fail, try, fail. Is that the best way to describe it? It's just a practice.
Sure.
We just learn when and how. And I think we're always learning that, although I would say I feel like I've got a good handle on what I can share and when. And secondly, this makes me excited to share about, is if vulnerability by definition is risk, uncertainty, and feeling emotionally raw, then we have to remember that whatever we say and whatever we do is for us. It's not for somebody else. It's for us, because the only person we can control is ourselves. That's it.
Yep.
Right? And that's what I would call integrity, right? I love the word integrity. I was just talking about this with a client this morning. The root of the word integrity is from the Latin integrare, to be whole.
Wow.
Whole, right? I love the word wholeness. I'm not trying to be happy. I'm trying to feel whole. That aligns with, again, this sense of peace and contentment. And the definition of integrity is when my actions and my values align. So I'm speaking in a way that's for me, that feels good to me, that allows me, no matter what happens out here, to walk away with a sense of, I'm okay with who I am and how I showed up. Another way of saying that is one of my litmus tests, which of course I missed the mark on, is there something I'm going to have to clean up after this is over? And if it is, then boy, do I need to pivot. Right? And maybe I can do that in this moment. Maybe I just know this has already gone off the rails and I need to step away and think about it. And I'm just going to have to come back at a later date anyway. So I think we have to remember that what we do and say is about us first. And where I see so many women struggling, me included, is instead of being vulnerable, we're armoring up with perfectionism. And perfectionism, we misdefine all the time. We think it's doing everything perfectly, crossing our T's and dotting our I's and, being so organized and just so. That's not it at all. That's how we might act out our perfectionism. But the definition of a perfectionism is trying to earn somebody else's approval.
Wow.
So if I choose not to be vulnerable for many different reasons, right? Some good, some not so great, and I armor up and I am so focused on you liking me, liking what I'm saying, that I am now out of my own skin. All I'm doing is just trying to please you, that I just break apart any sense of wholeness I wanted, had, or am striving for. So in that way, almost think of perfectionism and vulnerability as opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think what I'm trying to do in my own life, and then what I'm helping other women do, is build the skills so that in that moment, when something hard, risky, uncertain, and emotionally exposing comes up, it could be just my son is talking to me who's 7 and I just want to scream. Or it could be something very complex in my marriage with my husband. It could be tiny or huge, that I am able to lean into that part of me that is asking myself, what do I think, not what will you think?
Wow.
And it's just not easy work. It's just not easy, but boy, is it rewarding. So that's why I think that building that intimate relationship with ourselves, that's what being full of herself is all about, is the hardest, best work we could do. And once again, I'll put a plug in for having people, mentors, therapists, coaches, support groups, by the way, most of which are free, in our corner to help us wade through that, because we can't see what we can't see.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's no secret, y'all. Sarah's a coach. I am a coach. We will definitely connect Sarah's contact information in the description of this episode, wherever you're finding this episode and choosing to tune in, so you can connect with her and continue the conversation, possibly explore coaching with her as well. Something I wanted to ask you, in diving into your book a bit, on your website, you included the opportunity for people to get some journaling prompts. We just talked about how this work is worthwhile. And believe me, folks, it is worthwhile. It's very challenging sometimes, but you earn interest on the deposits that you're putting in the piggy bank that is yourself and your own emotional well-being and how you relate to the world. I'm curious, is there a journal prompt that you love above any of the rest that people can use to get started if this type of work is new for them?
The one that's popping into my mind is, who am I pretending to be?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean,
That one hit me.
seriously. Yeah, me too. Seriously, I could journal about that any given day, and I think I would have something to say that just shows me where I'm off the beam. And also on our Instagram, at the name of our business is More Soul Sessions. So at more.soul.sessions, every Monday we share a journal prompt to help people and make it easier, because some people, struggle. What do I write? By the way, when it comes to journaling, my best tip that I was given by a writing coach many years ago was set a timer. I do 10 minutes, because I don't know, well, I do know so many of us have so much up here that we think, yeah, journaling sounds awesome, but where on earth would I start? And so I love that you asked for a prompt, because I think that's so helpful to people. And we have a whole number of them in Full of Herself. And we created a free workbook that you can just download once you buy Full of Herself. The information is in the book. And there are over, I want to say 50 journal prompts. It could even be 100 that we included in there to help people. But that 10-minute timer is a game changer, I think. Just to give some kind of framework, guardrail, so it doesn't seem like this never ending, unnerving task. And every time I journal, I start with, I'm sat on my daybed, I'm sat at the lake house, I'm sat on the couch, I just did X, as a way to warm myself in, and then I start getting to the good stuff. And my best advice is also just keep the pen moving on the paper. Even if you're like, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to write. Who knows what's going to come next? I love it when it rains, even if that's not true, because what's happening is, I love journaling because it involves our body, right? When we change the momentum of our body, we change the momentum of our mind. So journaling is an embodied practice that helps us get out of our head, which can be a very scary place, and into our body. So when we keep the pen moving on the page, what we're doing is we're telling our brain that we're not just going to stop at the place that we feel comfortable. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep going. And then that next thought that we've been resisting is going to rise through. So just whatever you do, just keep writing, even if it's gibberish, because something that's true that you want to hear and know will rise to the surface.
Thank you so much for that. And of course, y'all, this only works if you actually put in the practice. So it's all well and good to sit here and conceptualize journaling or meditation or yoga or any other practice to support you in getting embodied and finding yourself and learning more about who you actually authentically are, but you actually get to put in the work. So please remember that if you're listening to this. And Sarah, I know we've had you for some time today, and I want to unfortunately wrap this up in respect to your time. But before we do, what are the best places for people to connect with you, to learn more, to get the book, so the ladies can learn to be full of herself?
Go to our website. I would, if you're interested in this work and you'd like to stay connected, sign up for our blog. We get so much great feedback on it week in, week out. And I'm telling stories of how I'm full of myself, how I'm falling way short. I get personal, and we also share a lot of tools and insights, and also any events that we're hosting. So that would be the first thing I would suggest. You can buy a copy of the book on the website, again, moresoulsessions.com. If you buy it from the website, I'll sign it and there'll be a free little gift to you, and it will just ship right out to you. And you can also grab a copy on Amazon. And if you're outside of the US, Amazon is the best and only place to get it. Those would be best next steps.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being a part of the show today. I got a ton out of this, so I know the listeners did. So thank you for who you be, for making an impact for women all over the globe with your work, with your message. And if I can say, just the way that you explain things, I find very captivating and supports me as someone who's done a lot of this work in understanding the same things a bit more deeply. So thank you for the gift today of your presence and your time. And the last question I want to ask you, which I ask every guest, what are you acknowledging yourself for today?
Today, I'm acknowledging myself for a pivot.
Mm,
We're doing some rebranding in our work and in our business. I have a wonderful team around me, and I set us on a course. And this morning, I changed the course and I gave myself permission to feel excited about it,
Yeah.
permission to change in the first place and own it,
Yeah.
not apologize. And I really appreciate and acknowledge myself for that.
I love that. And I acknowledge you for the courage that I'm sure it took for you to make those choices and to make those changes. And I cannot wait to see the impact that you're going to continue to have.
Mm. Thank you. You're an absolute sweetheart. This was a lovely time together. I appreciate all of your questions and your words and the people that you're supporting too.
Thank you, Sarah. And we're definitely going to want to have you back on the show in the future. And folks, for you listening, again, this has been your inside track to success. I know you got something out of today's episode, so please share it far and wide so that Sarah's message can make it out there to as many people as possible so that they can up level their lives. Please like, please subscribe, please comment the piece that was the most impactful for you in the comment section below. And we will catch you again next week with another episode of Your Inside Track to Success. Take care.